Daisy's time.
Come in. Let me prepare you a meal before we go.
Huh?
They say death has visited every house, on every street, in every village that has ever existed. He has never not once been turned away at the door. Until the night he knocked on Adiez's door, and she said, "Come in. Let me prepare you a meal before we go. I'm Mo, and tonight I'm taking you somewhere older than memory, before the cities, before the roads, before electricity carved the darkness into manageable places. I'm taking you to a time when the world was wider, and the night was deeper, and the line between the living and everything else was thin as smoke." The Igbo people have a saying, "The one who brings cola brings life." But what happens when the one who comes to your door does not bring life, but comes to take it? What happens when death himself knocks on your door and you are not ready, but you are clever? This is the story of Adieze, a woman so extraordinary that even the ancestors still speaks her name with something like admiration. Pull up your seat, move closer to the fire, and listen. The village of Umadioka sat at the place where the forest meets the farmland, that particular edge where the cultivated and the wild regard each other across a boundary neither fully respects. It was a village of perhaps 200 souls, farmers, traders, healers, storytellers, the kind of community where everyone knew everyone's business, and nobody pretended otherwise. At the far end of the village, the end closest to the forest, lived Adieze, widow, farmer, grandmother, 51 years old, and still looking younger than ever. She was not the most beautiful woman the village had produced, not the wealthiest, not the most powerful, but she was, without question, the sharpest, the kind of sharp that doesn't announce itself, that sits quietly behind ordinary eyes, and thinks, and watches, and waits. Her neighbors knew it, her children knew it, the traders who came through Umadioka knew it. They learned quickly not to try to cheat her. What nobody knew, what nobody could have known, was that one evening in October, when the harmattan was beginning to breathe its dry breath over everything, Adieze's particular sharpness would be required for something far beyond market negotiations. The first sign, Adi's cockerel refused to crow at dawn, simply sat on its perch, with its eyes half closed and made no sound. They village women noticed, clicked their tongues, said it was an omen, said something was coming. Adieze looked at the cockerel, said perhaps he is tired. The second sign, on the second night, every dog in the village began to howl. At precisely midnight, all at once, at nothing visible, at something felt. The village elders gathered in the morning, spoke in low, serious voices, said something was moving. On the other side of the veil, Adieze heard them, went home, cooked her evening meal, went to bed. The third sign, the most unambiguous, came on the afternoon of the third day. Adieze was in her garden when a black butterfly, enormous, silent, landed on her left hand. In Igbo land, a black butterfly landing on your left hand means one thing. She looked at it for a long time. The butterfly looked back. Then she said, very calmly, to the butterfly, to the garden, to whoever might be listening, "I hear you, but I am not ready, and I have never in my life done anything before I was ready." The butterfly flew away. Adieze went inside, and she began to cook. He came at sunset, that particular West African sunset that turns everything briefly gold. Before the darkness takes it, a knock at the door. 3 knocks. She wiped her hands on her wrapper and opened the door. He was tall. This is what people always say about death, that he is taller than seems possible, that he fills a doorway the way a mountain fills a horizon. Not aggressively, not threateningly, simply, completely. His face was a face that changed every time you looked at it directly, as if it couldn't decide what face to wear. In front of the living, he wore white, not the white of celebration. He looked at a daze, in a voice like the sound of earth being turned over. And he said,
"A daze is time."
And she said,
Come in. Let me prepare you a meal before we go.
Huh?
Death, who had visited every house, in every village, since the beginning of things, had never once been invited inside. He was surprised. And so, because even death is subject to curiosity, he stepped inside and sat down and waited. Now, what a days knew, and what very few people in Umadioka knew, came from her grandmother. Her grandmother had been the greatest storyteller the village had ever produced, a woman who could hold a crowd without anyone noticing the hours passing, from sundown to sunrise. And her grandmother had told her, once, quietly, in a whisper,
A story never ends while it is still being told.
Ada had been 12 years old when her grandmother told her this. She had carried it for 51 years. She had hoped she would never need it. But here was death, sitting in her best chair, large as fate, patient as eternity. She set water to boil, began to prepare pepper soup, the good kind, fresh from the market.
The secret is love. Ooh, and a little bit.
And she began to talk. She started with something small, a story about a farmer and a stubborn goat. Simple, funny, the kind of story that makes you smile. Before you realize you're smiling, Death sat very still, but his eyes, his ever-changing eyes, were on her. She finished the goat story. Let the last word land. Death shifted, the movement of a very patient entity, remembering why it came.
And then he just left me there. It was so funny. I couldn't stop laughing.
Really?
That's hilarious.
What happened next?
That was a good story, he said. Now, and that reminds me, said Adaze. Have you heard this one? Death closed his mouth. No, he said, against his better judgment. I have not heard it. And Adaeus smiled. The smile of a woman who has just felt the trap close. The cockerel finally crowed. She talked through the washing. She talked through the eating. Story after story, each one ending just barely, and leading immediately into the next. The market women, the chief who forgot his own name, the tortoise who tried to fly, the woman who married the spirit of the river, and did not discover this until the rains came. That last one, she stretched it, beautifully, expertly.
Oh, feel the rhythm in my soul, dancing free and wild. Look at these patterns. They're so beautiful.
Winding it through details, and digressions, and tangents, that somehow always returned to the main thread until she could see that even death, ancient, impassive, eternal death, was carried away. The night deepened. Midnight passed. The fire burned low. Adaze fed it without breaking her sentence. She could feel the exhaustion. She was 51 years old and she had been talking, but she did not stop. Because the moment she stopped, truly stopped, was the moment Death would remember why he had come. So she didn't stop. Dawn came, pink light through the window slats. Days turned to weeks, to months, to years. The village noticed death had not visited. No one was falling. No one was being taken. And in that small house at the edge of the world, Adaze sat across from Death himself and kept him captive with nothing but her words.
So then, the village gathered together and we all planted new trees. The story of our people is written in the stars and passed down from generation to generation.
Adaze was mid-sentence. When he held up his hand, she stopped. They looked at each other. You knew, Death said. My grandmother told me, Adaze said. Death was quiet for a long time, the longest silence Adaze had ever sat in. Then he said, you have until the story of the river woman is finished. When you tell its ending, I will come back, and you will come with me. Adaze nodded. That is fair, she said. And before he left he said, and this is the part the elders say, with the most wonder, your grandmother was right to teach you, and you were right to listen. In all the years of my work, I have never eaten pepper soup that good. And he was gone. Adaze lived for 39 more years, 39 years of morning markets and evening fires, of grandchildren climbing into her lap, and great-grandchildren learning to walk on her compound floor, of pepper soup and palm wine, and the particular pleasure of a life fully inhabited. She never finished the story of the river woman, but she told it continuously to anyone who would listen, picking it up and setting it down, adding new chapters, new details, new rooms in the story's house. She told it to her daughters. Her daughters told it to their daughters. It is still being told today, in some villages, by some grandmothers, to children who don't know yet why the story never ends. On the morning of her 90th birthday, surrounded by family and neighbors, and people who had come simply because Adi's compound was one of those places where the air felt better, she asked everyone to be quiet. She looked around at all the faces, and she said, the river woman, after 7 years of marriage, finally went back to the water, and she was, at last, at peace. The compound was silent. Then one of her granddaughters, who had heard the river woman's story 100 times, said slightly, Ma, is that the ending? Adaze smiled. The smile of a woman who has decided she is ready. Yes, that is the ending. And she leaned back. And she was, very quietly, very peacefully, gone. The elders say that when death came that last morning, he did not need to knock, and that Adaze was waiting, sitting in her best chair, with a pot of pepper soup on the fire, and said, I kept my end, did I not? And death, ancient, impassive, eternal, is said to have done something he had never done before. He bowed. The bow of someone acknowledging a worthy adversary. I think about Adaze often, about what it means to face the most terrifying thing imaginable and respond with, sit down, let me feed you first. There is a kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. It looks like calmness. It looks like hospitality. It looks like an old woman ladling pepper soup at sunset. But underneath, it is the bravest thing in the world. The decision, in the face of everything, to remain yourself, to use what you have, to tell your story for as long as you can. And when the time comes, to finish it with grace. That's the power of a story.